Second World War marked a turning point in modern American history, where America shed its isolationist roots and enthralled itself in a bloody war with her adversaries in Europe and the Pacific. Millions of patriotic Americans devoted their lives to this war effort, and among these patriotic citizens were African Americans. African Americans sought to help their country through dire times, even though their country had abandoned them to the whims of Southern racism. They fulfilled their responsibilities to the country through their brave actions in Europe and the Pacific. Many lost their lives fighting for their country, yet still, they received less respect and recognition than German prisoners of war. Whether they fulfilled their responsibilities as Americans through combat or by supporting the soldiers on the front line, African Americans will never be afforded the rights promised to them by Jim Crow America. Even before the first American troops set foot in Europe and the Pacific, African Americans faced discrimination. Many were denied the right to enlist in certain military occupational specialties. To the white soldiers, African Americans were not civilized and brilliant enough to serve as effective soldiers, and thus did not have the right to be in the same MOS as white soldiers. Many enlisted African Americans were limited to non-combat roles such as laborers, cooks, drivers, and stewards. Even through the lack of respect for their natural rights, these brave men and women devoted their lives to fulfilling their responsibility to their nation through their service. Similar to the treatment they received back home, African Americans were segregated into separate barracks and units from their fellow soldiers, and very few African Americans were permitted to hold high-ranking positions. African Americans in the military were not valued by their white counterparts, and were often subjected to racism and discrimination, especially black soldiers in the Navy, who were treated as mere attendees for their white sailors, in order not to upset the racial politics of the ship. However, when the vessel was under attack, these supposed attendees were required to fight and were expected to lay down their lives for a country that regarded them as half American. Despite their treatment in the military and poor expectations from white soldiers, some African American military units performed exceptionally well in World War II. A prime example of African American excellence will be the Tuskegee Airmen, nicknamed Red Tails, for the unique paint on their jets. The Tuskegee Airmen were the first African American fighter squadron in the U.S. military. They played major parts in escorting bombers across Italy and Germany and other missions in Southern Europe and North Africa. Even on land, African American soldiers played crucial roles in the war. The 761st Tank Battalion was the first all-black tank battalion, nicknamed the Black Panthers. Their nickname came from their unique unit insignia. They would play major roles in the European campaign during the latter half of the war, to the point that Major General Willard S. Paul of the 26th Division gave special praise to the unit after his first action in France by writing, "I consider the 761st Tank Battalion to have entered combat with such conspicuous courage and success as to warrant special commendation." African Americans played other crucial roles in logistics and management across the Atlantic and Pacific fronts. Without the patriotic sense of responsibility from the African American community, the U.S. war machine would have struggled to even feed its own men.
Get to Sugar Hill way up in Harlem.
African American veterans returned home with the expectation that they would be praised for their service as American soldiers, and finally gain the rights they deserved for their heroic service. But this wasn't the case. These men were forced to return to the harsh reality that their rights would not be upheld. They were persecuted and ostracized by the Jim Crow South. Men had to fear for their lives as soon as they stepped off the boat. The land of the free was nothing more than a false dream built off the sacrifice and responsibility of these brave young men. They were soldiers who put their lives on the line, yet were oppressed under the constant fear of being lynched. Many African American veterans returned home to the same racist America that they had left behind during the war. Nothing had changed. Racism and segregation were still being endorsed by white Americans, and African Americans were still regarded by many as second-class citizens, despite America denouncing Hitler's racial supremacy ideology. The United States preached for the end of tyranny in Europe, yet suppressed the rights of African Americans. The contributions of African American veterans were not recognized, and they received no praise or medals to reward their performance during the war until much later. African American veterans who took pride in fulfilling their responsibilities as Americans were lynched, subjected to harsh treatment by their white counterparts. Isaac Woodard was one of these unfortunate souls. He lost his vision to white police officers who assaulted and severely crippled him for being accused of public disturbance after arguing with a bus driver. Isaac's case was taken to the White House by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and after Harry Truman got word of what had happened, he was truly disgusted by the treatment of African American veterans. Truman pushed for federal courts to take the police officers to trial. Many white Americans, especially those in Jim Crow's South, were not happy with Harry Truman's decision and protested against the prosecution of the white police officers. Southerners viewed Harry Truman's decision to push for a trial against the policeman who assaulted Isaac as an unconstitutional intrusion of federal power on local matters. This government incursion did not sit well with Southerners. Radical groups like the Ku Klux Klan set their eyes on terrorizing African Americans, both veterans and civilians, to enforce a social hierarchy built on the fear and oppression of African Americans. The first Negro to vote will never vote again was a note found on many African American homes in Taylor County, Georgia. The KKK series was not just done through fear, but also action. On July 25, 1946, two African American couples were lynched and killed by a Southern mob. One of the lynchmen was a veteran by the name of George W. Dorsey. This man fought for America. He fulfilled his responsibility as American, yet he could not be awarded the basic right of not being lynched. Just as an African American journalist from the Chicago Defender stated, "They're exterminating us. They're killing Negro veterans, and we don't have nothing to fight back with except our bare hands." The misfortunes of African American soldiers did not just stop at the Southern mobs, but also with the GI Bill. The GI Bill was signed by Franklin Roosevelt, promising returning veterans jobs and educational opportunities. However, this did not apply to African Americans who faced discrimination in the South. Southern local governments administered the GI Bill, allowing them to deny African American veterans the right to use the full benefits of the GI Bill. They were denied the right to buy houses, denied the equipment needed to complete their education, and were abused by Southerners for trying to use their GI Bills. The government failed to protect the rights of African American veterans who had risked their lives to uphold their responsibility as Americans. African Americans served in the war with the expectation of being treated as citizens for their patriotism, but instead they were treated with public lynchings and police brutality as a gratitude for their service. Despite the war being over, African Americans returned home to fight another war, a war for freedom and equal rights. As a counter to their brutal treatment, African Americans launched the Double V campaign to demand for full recognition as citizens for the fulfillment of their responsibility as Americans. The Double V campaign, a term championed by the Pittsburgh Courier, was a call for victory against Nazis abroad and a victory against racism at home, as African Americans who fought in the war refused to accept segregation after their sacrifices. The movement began around 1942, but the origins of the movement can be traced back to when the Pittsburgh Courier compared Germany's treatment of the Jews to the United States treatment of African Americans. The term Double V did not become popularized until 1942, after the Pittsburgh Courier published James G. Thompson's letter where he asked, "Should I sacrifice to live half American?" Thompson's letter called for a double victory, a dual victory against tyranny at home and abroad. The campaign marked the beginnings of the post-World War II civil rights movement and the push for racial equality. The movement symbolized the fight for racial justice and the increasing drive toward racial equality.
Well, I guess I better get on in here with it.
The sacrifices of African American soldiers throughout the war marked a turning point in the civil rights movement. The war showed African Americans that completing their responsibilities as Americans meant nothing to the Jim Crow South, which feared seeing a Negro with a rifle. African American veterans were abused, lynched, and assaulted for simply fighting for their country. The disgusting acts committed by the Jim Crow South ultimately led to Truman's famous Executive Order 9981. As stated in the first point of the executive order, it is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin. The fight against racism did not end with this executive order, but it did open the pathway to defeating racism and the Jim Crow mindset of the South.